In this video, I'm going to show you the art of learning like a genius.
Okay, so I have this friend named Christian, and he is literally a genius. I genuinely tried to pick his brain, the type of brain that can learn something once and almost instantly retain it, in efforts to see if I could. He didn't even know it at the time, but what he showed me completely changed my entire perspective on learning.
We're in biology class. After I finished writing a chunk of notes from the teacher lecturing, I look over and he isn't writing. He barely has any words on his paper. You know what he's doing? Eating. I'm over here copying an essay from the teacher's whiteboard and he's just happily snacking. I was fed up because he easily surpassed everyone else in my class, but I can almost never catch him taking any notes. So towards the end of class, I sit him down and I'm like, okay, how do you take notes? And he said something unwittingly profound. I just write whatever I need to understand. Then he pulls over my notes and he's like, oh, you're writing everything word for word? Yes, of course I am. The teacher writes on the board and I copy it. We continued talking and he continued to keep mentioning that it was all about understanding and making connections in your head. After some further research into meta learning, the art of learning efficiently, I want to share with you the truth about learning that sprouted from the curiosity Christian planted in me. Simply put, your brain remembers what it deems important. When Christian said he only writes down what he understands, he didn't know it, but he was actually forcing his brain to remember. Your brain almost by default easily remembers what it can associate with already known concepts. And I saw this more and more when I talked with Christian. He would create simple visuals or wordplay examples of things way easier to grasp to connect to these more complex ideas. This method is inspired by the creator's state of mind, who has an incredible video on developing a photographic memory. I highly recommend that video. It's one of my favorites on YouTube, but I want to show you his method, which has genuinely changed the way I learn forever. It's called the Seward method, and basically you take a note card, you write the title of whatever you want to remember, and then a brief explanation. Writing it informally is key because it also helps build connection in your brain. If you copy whatever you're trying to learn word for word, all sciencey sounding, your brain has no reason to retain that. It's not connected to anything. This is why when I was taking notes in biology class word for word, nothing was sticking. Then you write a connection. This is a direct association example of you finding something in your life to connect to this concept. This is probably the most important part of this method. Finally, you draw a little tiny picture, which not only builds further association, but even helps you create a visual in your head when you need to recall. Christian literally did this automatically in his head. He always creates a visual representation of what he's learning. Memory is heavily relied on association. Association is the foundation for telling your brain whatever you consume has actual value. This is exactly why Christian only writes down what he needs to understand, because his brain then has to fill in that gap, creating an association, giving him genius-like learning abilities. A slightly quicker and simpler method that has helped me retain pages of word like it's glued to me is gist statements. I also do this on a note card, but it's just a sentence summarizing, let's say, a chapter in a book, for example. The sentence, and this is a hard and steadfast rule, cannot be more than 12 words. This forces you to write down the bare essentials of what you need to understand. Doing either of these methods also accomplishes something life-changing. It gamifies learning. A lot of us start to associate learning in general, but specifically reading and researching and taking notes, with being bored and annoyed because of school. But with these methods, not only does it quantify learning, but it also brings a level of enjoyment and excitement that most people don't naturally have because it was beaten out of them at a young age. The best way I've retained and better yet deeply understood topics that I wanted to learn about is discussing them.
Debating, joking, FaceTiming, 3 a.m. conversations, talking through ideas is possibly one of the most effective strategies I've found to ingrain ideas into your head. A lot of the times when we consume information, we don't fully digest, and it's left in this cerebral void unsolidified. We learn the terms or topics at a surface level, but we don't let them plant roots in our minds, and so we forget them pretty quickly. Having back and forth with another human being really grounds everything that you would have forgotten and gets all that consumption to go from information to knowledge by helping you understand what you're learning. I think it's fair to say that the deepest level of learning is understanding. And I'm pretty sure that the actual best and most overpowered but double-edged technique I've used to gain a grasp on what are initially more complex ideas that I want to learn would be debating them. And I don't mean in an angry way where the intention is hostile, although this is the other edge of the sword, and if you're not careful, you could severely wound a relationship. But the back and forth of challenging someone's and your own ideas, conversation, but especially debate, does something particularly overpowered. Memory does not occur by repeated exposure. So rereading or reconsuming isn't the best way to retain anything. Memory occurs by repeated recall. not repeated exposure. Act of flipping through the archives of your mind, finding that information, pulling it out, and applying it is practically how you really retain something. Trust me. This chapter will be slept on, but it's exceedingly transformative. The most underrated aspect when it comes to getting better at consuming is consuming less. You have to limit your inputs if you want to genuinely retain what you consume. And better yet, have your life changed by it. Too much music and too many videos and too much food, it saps the mental energy and bandwidth. Think about it like this. The more you consume, the more mental energy you are dispersing and giving away. But deeply ingraining and retaining information also takes mental energy. If you are constantly emptying your tank of mental energy by constantly letting it drip out through nonstop music and videos, you won't have enough left over to fuel the process of remembering, the process of turning information into knowledge. You'll be trying to study for a test, but you have a song stuck in your head. You'll be reading and have so little mental energy and mindfulness that you have to keep rereading the same page over and over. There is a season for consuming wide and trying to gather as much information as you can at once. But the most important and neglected season is the season that comes after that. The season of consuming deep. The season of limiting your input. Taking the best resources you found and using your full fuel tank of mental energy simply for understanding. But then again, it's not actually learning if you don't apply. In this video, I taught you how to retain, which is a huge part. And it's what I personally would get held up on a lot. But if you don't change your actions with what you now are actually retaining, you never learned. If this video does well, I'll make a part 2 to the art of learning effectively. Part 1, association, part 2, application. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope this video brought you some level of value. Those 2 methods worked wonders for me. It's not even the specific methods, it's the knowledge on how memory actually works. Not repeated exposure, but repeated recall. Constantly associating and applying. I hope you all have the bestest of days, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye, guys.